Hello everyone, my name's Alano, and welcome to my GameMaker Studio tutorials. Now in this episode, I'll be starting a new series where I'll be creating an RPG game from the ground up with you guys using GameMaker Studio 2. Now, before I go ahead and hop into today's topic, which is going to be movement and collisions for the first episode, I want to show you guys what I have in store for this series in the future videos. So, like I said, we're going to do movement and collisions for RPG game, top-down 2D, of course. I also want to check sprites and animation. I want to do some camera movement, so a way to actually control some dynamic cameras. Also, we're going to check for the experience points and leveling, so some sort of simple but powerful leveling system. Also, a way to upgrade the player stats. I'm planning to do it in the way of Final Fantasy X. I'm not sure if you guys remember, or if you've even played this game, but the way it works is that each time you finish a battle, you get some sphere levels. And with these sphere levels, you can actually use some items to upgrade, say, your strength, your speed, your intelligence, and pretty much all these stats. So I want to do a system similar to Final Fantasy X's leveling system. And also the comparative turn-based battle system, which is going to be a big piece of this series. I'm planning to do something like 10 or maybe 15 videos just on this battle system, but it's gonna be pretty awesome. I'm pretty sure about that. Also, text boxes. It's a must-have for RPG tutorials, and I'm also going to show you how to localize the text for these text boxes. So, say you have your game in English and you want to translate it to French, Spanish, Italian, or whatever you want. I'm going to show you how to do just that. Also, another big piece is going to be the inventory system, and lastly, the saving system I want to show you guys. Now, I won't be doing these in that exact order. Some things are better to do first and some things are better to do last, but this is a simple overview of what I want to do with this series with you guys. So, without further ado, let's hop into the meat of today's video, which is going to be movement and collisions. Alright, so first things first. When you open up a new project in GameMaker Studio 2, there's always a room that is prepared for you guys. So we're going to use this room, but we're going to change some variables inside the room to, well, shape it to what we want to do with it. But first, let's go into the options, into the main options, and we want to change the game frames per second to 60. So we want the smoothest possible experience with our game. That's why we are going to set this to 60 frames per second. Click apply, OK, and click on the room. Here we are going to change on the background layer, we're going to change the color to white. So this is going to be a test room for us. Obviously in the future we're going to change the background, we're going to add in some tiles and all. But let's start simple. So down here you can change the width and height of the room. We want a width of 1536 pixels and a height of 864, just like so. And also we want to enable the physics inside this room. We are going to use the physics engine included in GameMaker Studio 2. So I haven't done this before. Well, in tutorial form, but it's actually really powerful. So I thought it'd be nice to show a tutorial using this physics engine. So gravity X stays 0, but of course, since it's a top-down game and not a platformer, we don't want a gravity on the Y-axis, so just set this to 0. And this should be fine for the room for now. Next, let's create some sprites for our players. So under the sprite tab here, click create. There's a sprite editor that's going to open up. We're going to name this sprite to SPR_player. And under the size here, click the arrow keys and we're going to resize the canvas to be 48 by 48 pixels. If you double click on the image here, we enter the frame editor where we can, well, draw what we want to draw, or even, well, if you could, it's kind of a powerful tool. You could use this to draw every and each sprite of your game, but I won't be doing this. I have some sprite in my computer that I will be using later on. For now, just click on the fill tool, and we're going to use a nice blue square for our player. So you can go ahead and press X here. We want to change the origins to be middle center, and this should be just fine. We are also going to need a wall object, so create another sprite, or actually, you know what? Let's just duplicate the one we have here. So right click on a sprite player and click duplicate, and we're going to name this, if you press F2 on your keyboard, you can, it's the dedicated key to renaming some stuff. So press F2, and we're going to call this SPR wall. Double click on this, and we're going to change the color to, say, dark gray. We could also go black, but hey, it's not important. It's not going to stay this color for long anyway. Great. Next up is the objects. So first object we are going to create in our game is the input object. So we're going to use this all throughout our game to actually check for inputs from the player or you. This way we separate the code into different sections that are going to be easier to control and change in the future. So for that, we're simply going to add in a step event. Let's call this input control, like so. And we are going to need 4 inputs for today's episode, which is going to be up, down, left, and right. Now, how are we going to check for inputs? Easy enough. We're going to use the keyboard, and I'm going to use the WASD keys for this. Later on, I might go ahead and program some gamepad inputs for the game. Actually, probably I will do. But for now, this is going to work just fine. So we're going to use the function keyboard underscore check, and we want to check for a letter. So we're going to use ORD. Up is going to be W. Just like so. We can go ahead and copy this here to each and every other, I misspelled down here. There we go. So down we're going to use the letter S, left we're going to use the letter A, and right we're going to use the letter D. So it's also important that you don't forget, when you use the ORD function in GameMaker, you have to put capital letters. So you can't go ahead and put A like this. You have to go capital A. Alright, so that's it for the input object. Next up is the wall object. So let's go ahead and create another one, and we're going to call this obj underscore wall. And in here we won't be doing much except assigning the wall sprite to the object right here, and we're also going to check the uses physics box on the object editor. So if you click down here on the physics, you can go ahead and change the all the physics variables and settings. For now, we won't go ahead and change a lot of these, maybe later on. But for now, we're just going to check the density. So the density is essentially the weight of the object. And if we put 0 here, it effectively tells GameMaker that this is an object that cannot be moved. So for instance, a wall cannot be moved. Next, we're going to modify the collision shape for the physics engine, and we want to make sure that it is 48 by 48 and a box. So this works, this looks pretty fine. Let me just go ahead and resize this, make sure that it works. All right, so that's it for the wall object. And let's go ahead and create another one, which is going to be our player. So let's call this obj underscore player. Assign it the blue player sprite. We are also going to check the uses physics for this object. And under the physics tab, we're going to leave the density to 0.5 for this one. Let's go ahead and modify the collision shape. And for this one, we're actually going to change how the collision works. So instead of going for the full image, we are actually going to go ahead and do the half image. So let's set the grid to snap by 24 and 24. You can click on the snap to grid right here. And we want to go ahead and just have the collision box at the bottom of the sprite. This way, when we go in front of a wall, the player is going to overlap over the wall. And you're going to see this in just a moment. Alright, so we are done with the physics. Next up is the coding part. We can go ahead and add a create event, and in here we are going to initialize all the variables. Initialize, yep. So the first one we're going to need is actually a max speed variable. So when we're moving, we want the player to go to a certain speed and not go over this speed. So let's just go ahead and write some variables here. Max speed, and we are going to set this to 5 for now. Later on we might go ahead and tweak this a bit, but this is going to be fine for now. Now that we have the max speed set up, we're going to add in another event, this time the step event. And in here we are going to call the main actions for our player, starting with movement. So how are we going to tackle the movement? First off, we want to check if the player has actually pressed a key. So if you remember correctly, all the input variables are in the input object. So we're going to go ahead and write input dot up, and we use the dot here to access a variable from another object. Alright, so if input dot up is true, we want to, and since we are using the physics engine, we have to use the physics movement also. So we want to move the physics position, position X, no, up is Y. Physics position Y, and we want to minus equal this to max speed. I put a minus in front of the equal here because when calculating the X and Y positions in GameMaker, it always refers to the top left corner of the room. So if we go down, it's positive, and if we go up, it's negative. Or, well, right is positive and left is negative, depending on which axis you're on. Since we are on the y-axis and we want to go up, we want to go in the negative direction on the y-axis. So we're going to do the exact same thing for all the other inputs. So we can go ahead and copy and paste this. So if input down is true, physics position y is going to be plus equal to max speed because we're going down. If input left is true, then this time around it's physics position x, and left is going in the positive direction, so we want to go ahead and write plus equals. Actually, no, it's the negative direction. And right, if input dot right is true, on the x-axis we want to go into the positive direction. Now that this is done, we have the physics engine set up, we have the movement set up, we also have the input set up. There's only one thing left to do, and it's actually to tell the physics engine that the player object cannot collide, well, cannot go through a wall. So we have to set up the collisions. And using the physics engine, it's actually pretty simple. You just have to go ahead and add a collision with the object wall into the player object, and the only thing you need to do is write any line of code in here. So we're just going to write a comment, collision, and this way GameMaker knows that there is a collision it has to check for with the wall object and the player object. Alright, so let's put these objects in our room and see how this goes. So we're going to create a new layer here. We're going to call this layer control. So remember, you press S2. So this is the control layer. And inside the control layer, we are going to put our input object right on the top left corner there. We are going to also create a layer for the walls. So press F2. This is going to be our walls layer. Put the walls layer just below the instances layer. So inside the wall layer, we want to change the grid here to 24 by 24. We can also put it black so we can actually see it. And we are going to place some walls. So let's drag in the object wall. And a neat thing you can do in GameMaker is, instead of going ahead and just putting a lot of these objects to make the wall you want to create, we can just go ahead and stretch these out. So let me delete them. And you can go ahead and just stretch it like that. So this way you use less object, and it's a good way to actually optimize your game. So I'm just going to create really fast a box here for our player to stay in. Like so, and some obstacles. Say we have a wall here, we have some other wall here, like that, and let's put another one there just for good measures. There we go. And we also put our player object inside, and let's save, press play, and see how this goes. Alright, so as you can see, we can now use the W, A, S, and D keys to move our character around. The collision also works, so if I go ahead and try to enter the wall, it doesn't work. And if I go from the bottom, you can see that my character overlaps a little on the wall. Sorry, I bumped the microphone there. But there is two slight problems with the way of doing it like this. It's extremely simple and extremely good, but still. The physics engine in GameMaker isn't only for X and Y movement, it's also for the rotation. So if I go ahead and collide with the wall just on the corner of my player, you can see that, whoop, the player rotates. Obviously, we don't want that. So let's start with this thing and go ahead and fix it. And it's actually pretty simple. So if I go back into my workspace here, into the player object, let's go in the create event. So we just want to make sure that the physics, well, doesn't allow the rotation. So let's go ahead and add a physics tab. And in here, we are simply going to write physics fixed rotation is equal to true. Like so. And it's as simple as that. So if we go ahead and test the game again, you can see that collision still works, and now the player doesn't rotate when I try to go up. Alright. Now the other issue with that is that if you look correctly, when I go down, I go to a set speed. Alright? And if I go right, I go to also a set speed. But if I try to go in diagonal, the speed, well, they add together and we go faster. Now obviously we do not want that. We want to go the same speed even if we go left, right, up, down, or in diagonal. So let's go ahead and change our step event. Let's go ahead and change our movement and fix this. So this is the simplest way of handling movement using the GameMaker's physics engine. You give in an input, and then you move the object depending on a given speed. Now, this works, but it's not the most optimized way of doing so. And yeah, so let's go ahead and write a better way of handling movement. And we're going to do this using axes. So let's set up two variables. Let's call them x-axis and y-axis. The x-axis is going to be equal to input dot right minus input dot left. Be careful not to misspell any of your code. It's really important. And the y-axis is going to be equal to input dot down minus input dot up. So instead of getting the input directly and moving the player depending on this, we can use this x and y axis variable to, well, get the player input, but also get the direction the player is going to, and also a speed that is equal all the way around. And the neat thing of also doing this like that is that you can use keyboard inputs for the x and y axis, But you could also go ahead and program in a joystick input. So say you want to use a gamepad. I will be showing you how to do this later on, but not today. So like I said, next thing we want to do is actually get the direction the player is going to move to. And we're going to do this by setting up a new variable called dir. And I use underscore here to show myself that this is a temporary variable. Sometimes I use it, well, okay, I'm going to use it all the way around. This way it makes your code cleaner and easier to read. So the direction of the player, we're going to go ahead and use the point direction function from GameMaker. We want to check from a initial position of 0x and 0y, and we want to check the x-axis and the y-axis. I use an underscore, don't forget that. Now that we have the direction the player is going to go to, we also want the speed, because we want the player to go the exact same speed, whether he's going left, right, up, down, or in diagonal. So let's do just that right now. First, we want to check if the player has pressed a button. If he hasn't, well, he doesn't move. So if x-axis is equal to 0, meaning that he hasn't pressed A or D, and y-axis is equal to 0, meaning that the player hasn't pressed up or down, we want to go ahead and set a new variable called spd to 0. Else, let's go ahead and set our, well, sorry, I'm going to just make the code a bit easier to read. All right, we're going to set the speed variable, spd, to be equal to max speed. So this way, if we're not pressing any buttons, the speed is 0, so we don't move. And if we are pressing a button, then the speed is going to be max speed. We have the speed, we have the direction. Now how do we actually use these two variables to make the player go at the same speed if he's going in diagonal or in a left, right, or up and down movement? And it's actually going to be pretty simple. For that, we're going to need two new variables, and we're going to call them HSP and VSP. These are going to control the horizontal movement and the vertical movement of the player. So var HSP, and we're also going to need var VSP. Whoa. Like so. And be careful not to use the hspeed variable that is built into the GameMaker engine. We don't want that. So HSP, like so, is going to be equal to a handy function in GameMaker called length_dir_x, and what this does, it gets a length depending on a direction and a speed that you give it. So in here we are going to set in the speed variable, and we are also going to give it the dir variable, and we're going to do the exact same thing for the VSP. So length_y this time around, we're going to give it the speed variable and the dir variable, like so. Now the only thing left to do is actually, well, move the player. So let's go ahead and do just that. We're going to set in our physics position x to be plus equal our x is HSP. Let me just put an underscore here so that our variables are consistent throughout the game. And we are going to set the physics position y to be equal to VSP. Actually plus equal. Alright, so with all this code, we should have a moving player that moves at the same speed in all directions. So we can still move around, which is great. The collision still works, which is also great. And as you can see, if I go in diagonal, I don't go faster anymore. Alright. So that's it for today's video. We have a working game with movement and collisions, just like we wanted to. The source code is going to be in the video's description if you want to check it out by yourself at home. Also, if this video was awesome, go ahead and press the like button below. Leave me a comment if you need any help or if you want to suggest a topic for a further video, and go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to also go ahead and check my Patreon page. This way you can support me in the making of future awesome videos like these. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.